Welcome to Menopause Rescue. I'm Dr. Polly Watson. Midlife women are often caught up in a sea of symptoms. Too often, they're overwhelmed by the lack of support from mainstream healthcare. They're inundated with so-called experts who are selling solutions which may lack credibility. I'm a Menopause Society certified gynecologist with both traditional and functional medicine training. I'm here to guide you through this transition and help you decipher the facts from the fads. Armed with credible information, I hope you are empowered to rescue and restore your health, making the second half of your life your best. Welcome to Menopause Rescue. I'm your host, Dr. Polly Watson. Today, we're going to be talking about perimenopause and fatigue, and I'm so excited to be joined by Kate Willis, who is the nurse practitioner at Hormone Wellness MD. And we're just going to dive right in because this is something we are all feeling. I'm so tired. I hear this all day long. And so, perimenopause is tough. It's a roller coaster. Our hormones are up and then they're down. Our sleep's disrupted. We're often in a season of life where we're managing launching children, elder parents. We might have the career ceiling right over our head. So let's just kind of dive in this social context. As we're having these hormonal changes, how can that impact energy levels?
Man, perimenopause is definitely a wild ride. We have on our intake forms, we always ask people their primary concerns, and fatigue is often up there near the top. So this is really common. So if this is you, just know that you are in really good company, and hopefully you'll learn something today. Early on, though, in the perimenopause transition, we start to see this decrease in progesterone before we may have a decline in estrogen. And progesterone is really important for our mood, but also for restful sleep. So that may be an early complaint that someone has, is that they are having maybe disrupted sleep. Maybe they're waking up at 3 a.m. and they can't go back to sleep, or they can't fall asleep. Maybe they're anxious and that's keeping them up at night. But poor sleep can absolutely drive fatigue. With time, we will all have a decline in estrogen too in this perimenopause transition, which can lead to things like hot flashes and night sweats. Estrogen is really important for sleep and sleep maintenance too. I don't think we talk about that enough, but we can, even in the absence of hot flashes, have disrupted sleep due to not only declining progesterone, but declining estrogen. Estrogen also just directly impacts our mitochondria too. So even if we're sleeping okay, at night, if you remember back from high school science, the mitochondria are the energy producers in our body. So if our mitochondria don't work well, none of our cells work the way they're supposed to, and we can absolutely be experiencing symptoms of fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, it's such a circle. It's everything so connected. And so when you're talking about these hormonal changes, um, when estrogen levels are fluctuating, we also have neurocognitive changes, right? We have working memory changes, language acquisition changes where you can't come up with the word. And so I think it's really important to kind of put that out there for people, because not only they're exhausted, but I know a lot of us are professional women that are taking work home that we didn't get done in the workday because we're not as sharp as we used to be during that workday. And it could be from sleep disruption, it could be from the hormone fluctuations, it could be from, a lot of things going on in our lives. But just to kind of own that whole picture of, yeah, we need our brains to work. And that is just, it is so powerful when we're undergoing these changes. That was kind of how I knew that it was time to add estrogen back in. Was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I felt like I was pregnant. I felt that tired. That was the last time I remember being that tired. And I got my estrogen level checked and it was 20. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's time. And then, like, within 2 days of slapping a patch on, I'm like, she's back. I mean, it was so great.
Yes.
It's not always that simple. It's really fun when it is that simple.
It is really exciting. So it is great. Listening, I think this is where listening to women is really important, and not just sort of coming up with a diagnosis, writing a prescription, but understanding, do we think this might be an issue with progesterone? Do we think estrogen needs to be addressed? Is there a hormone here that is pointing to why this person might be experiencing fatigue? Digging into sleep. Are you waking up in the middle of the night? Can you not fall asleep? Are you feeling really, I'll describe the anxiety that women often get in perimenopause as a really physical anxiety. So not just I'm worried about something in my head, but I feel really physically anxious. I feel edgy. I feel, and maybe even in the absence of something to be anxious about.
Right.
That I think is really key, is listening and saying where might be the problem with your hormones. If that is the driver of fatigue, estrogen, progesterone, maybe both might be helpful.
Right. And then maybe low testosterone too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes.
Because, we see that often, and it's sometimes it's not just one thing, and that's why we're always checking. A lot of folks won't check hormone levels, and yes, they do change, and yes, they do fluctuate, but like Kate started off with, is that in this process, progesterone is typically going down. Well, if you're still cycling, we can get a day 19 to 21 progesterone. Did you ovulate this month? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a snapshot in time, but if you're kind of clever about when you do it, you can really get some data from that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that we're testing women's hormone, I think so many women have felt dismissed, and they've just said, their healthcare provider has said, this is just normal part of aging. And
Mm-hmm.
I just can't handle that, because
Yes.
you're like, I'm 45 or whatever you are at perimenopause. Like, you're going to feel like crap for another 45 years. Like, that's unacceptable.
Yes. The other thing that I think, if someone is either maybe not at the right stage for hormones, and I'd say that's a complex conversation to have,
Right.
but or if someone really doesn't want hormones for any reason, or they're not a good candidate, thinking about what are, perimenopause and menopause are not just hormone changes. They are like a whole body remodeling. Our
Right.
brain's changing, our cells are changing. And so thinking about what might be affected, maybe it's not the absolute that estrogen is so low, but maybe it's the roller coaster of estrogen that's driving symptoms. Maybe it's the, estrogen needs more detox support, or maybe they need some or would benefit from some what we call adaptogens, which are herbs that support stress. Maybe we can boost energy levels that way. The mitochondria, which I mentioned, are taking a hit often during this period of time. And so directly supporting mitochondrial function, things like CoQ10, B vitamins, alpha lipoic acid, magnesium, that can be a great thing too to come in with. And there are lots of other ways to support our mitochondria as well, but just some thoughts about, making our thoughts a little bigger than just a hormone. What might the hormonal changes be driving in the mitochondria or within the body that's driving fatigue as well?
Well, and I think, Kate, I love that you're bringing up mitochondrial health, because I feel like so many people are going to like hormone clinics, and they're going to hormone clinics with blinders on, and their healthcare provider in maybe an online clinic, maybe they never meet face to face, maybe they even just are filling out questionnaires. I mean, you're meeting with patients virtually, but you're seeing them, you're assessing them, you're having a conversation with them. Those clinics aren't looking at all these other things, right? So in our functional medicine toolbox, we have something called an organic acids test,
Mm-hmm.
where the patient gives a urine specimen, we send it off to Mosaic Labs, and we actually get kind of the steps of the Krebs cycle, which is sort of how you make energy. We can see what you're deficient in and then act on it. So this is a testable area where we can really use science and data and testing to really get to the bottom of, why are you tired? Is this a mitochondrial problem? Is it a nutrient deficiency that you alluded to?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot more tools in our toolkit, being functional medicine providers.
Absolutely. I am seeing more patients come to see me already on hormone therapy, which part of me is happy that there are community providers that are that are willing and giving hormone therapy to patients. But they say, I don't feel better. Or maybe I sleep a little bit better with the progesterone, but
Right.
I don't feel as good as I thought I would feel on hormone therapy. And so that's where we have to get a little more broad beyond hormone therapy and say, hey, let's look at some other areas of your life. We can talk about lifestyle, but we can also talk about, do you have a nutrient deficiency that's driving this? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But just broadening the lens is what I would emphasize.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about, we often talk about metabolic health, and I know you've done a lot of work with a little glucose insight class you did. And if people aren't familiar, so metabolic health, we're often talking about insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to get insulin into the cell to use for energy. So can you talk a little bit about how metabolic health affects energy and how all this is changing during this season?
Yes. So we tend to get more insulin resistant in perimenopause and menopause. And as you were saying, this really means that we need more insulin in the blood to unlock. We say that insulin is like the key that unlocks the cells, but we need more insulin to unlock our cells so that glucose gets in. And this can create fatigue actually for a couple of reasons. Number one, excess insulin is inflammatory. So it's creating this state of systemic inflammation. It also means that blood glucose is not getting into our cells as efficiently. It doesn't get into our brain as efficiently as we need. It doesn't get into our muscles as efficiently. So our cells aren't getting proper fuel in the right time. And so, that's another reason is that our blood sugar might be really high, but it's hanging out in our bloodstream, not moving into the cells where we can use it for energy. That's sort of it in a nutshell.
So, Kate, you've done a great job about kind of explaining insulin resistance and this lock and key mechanism for getting glucose in the cell. That might seem kind of like academic for folks. So, can you really drive it home? How do we evaluate this? What is in our toolkit when we're working with patients on insulin resistant and hormone wellness?
Yes. So if you know us, we love muscle building in perimenopause and menopause. Muscle absolutely is the one of the big keys to reversing insulin resistance. Muscle helps improve our insulin sensitivity. And so anyone who's experiencing insulin resistance, and I would argue even before someone experiences insulin resistance, we would really encourage building lean muscle mass. Our diet is part of that too. So if we are eating a higher carbohydrate, more refined diet, we are giving more opportunities for excess insulin in the blood. And so changing the diet, switching to a more whole foods, moderate to lower carbohydrate, really depending on the person, diet can improve insulin sensitivity in the cells as well. So those are two kind of lifestyle things. I would add that sleep is really important. And I know we've touched on sleep a little bit, but we have worse insulin sensitivity the day after a night of poor sleep. And so if we're continually not sleeping well, we can be adding to our insulin resistance. And so really focusing on quality sleep, I think is really, really important. Beyond that, we have a great arsenal of supplements that are truly helpful for insulin resistance. And so things like berberine, inositol, magnesium, alpha lipoic acid. You'll notice some overlap with the mitochondrial support supplements. And that's the cool thing about supplements is they're often having multiple mechanisms of action. And so they are not just supporting one thing in the body. For example, magnesium is helpful with insulin resistance. It's also a great mitochondrial support. So you're getting a 2-for-1 when you use that, really more than just those two impacts, but those are two of the things that magnesium can do. Our gut health is really important. And so there are actually some probiotics that target something called Akkermansia, which is really important for metabolic health. And so that can be part of the supplement regimen or just the treatment plan that we create for someone who's struggling with insulin resistance. And then we have medications available. And the cool thing about being in this space is we get to use supplements and lifestyle and also use pharmaceuticals when they're appropriate for a person or when someone's interested in that route. So metformin is a really old medication that's been around for a long time that improves peripheral insulin sensitivity. And then also the GLP-1 medications like semaglutide and tirzepatide are helping restore some insulin sensitivity as well. So we have a lot of things in our toolbox when it comes to insulin resistance.
And one of the things that I love that you're so good at in the practice is using continuous glucose monitors, because I think that can be a real game changer for people to be able to see sort of cause and effect, what they're eating and what happens to their blood sugar. So can you talk a little bit about how you use continuous glucose monitors just with patients? If you have any personal anecdotes, I'm sure people would love to hear that.
Yes. So I have really enjoyed using these as a great tool because I feel like they put patients in the driver's seat. Sometimes we can feel like, these are labs or things that we get done and they come to us and they are what they are. And for a person to be using a continuous glucose monitor that is on their arm and they're getting to experiment with it at home, they can see what a bowl of ice cream at night does, or what eating, pizza for dinner does versus eating, a good quality protein and vegetables and maybe some quinoa for dinner, so they get to compare what's going on with my blood sugar. Can I modulate how far my blood sugar goes up and thus how much insulin gets secreted? So these monitors aren't themselves measuring insulin in the blood. They are measuring blood sugar. But we know when blood sugar goes up, insulin is the thing that gets it down. So it's helping us understand, how do I keep my blood sugar from going up too much? How do I have fewer spikes across the day? And I've seen people make huge changes.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen many patients that come in, end up in sort of that pre-diabetic range for the first time in their life, and they're shocked. That's a time when I'm often recommending a continuous glucose monitor. And people are reversing prediabetes. People are improving that hemoglobin A1C, which is the 90-day average of their blood sugar, by multiple points. And they're really, benefiting their health in so many ways. So I love using these, and I love seeing patients really take agency over their blood sugar and what's going on with their health.
I love that. And I think it also helps people when we're thinking about promoting insulin sensitivity. Sometimes we're thinking about timed eating. And so I've seen a lot of people being able to see, okay, this is what's happening to my blood sugar overnight when I have that 8, 9, 10 o'clock snack. And then they can see, oh, look, I went up and then I crashed and then I woke up again, right? So it can really come full circle for folks to say, okay, the kitchens really should be closed at 7 o'clock. I'm going to have at least a 12-hour fast. Depending on when you exercise and all those things, sometimes people can experiment with slightly longer fast. But I totally agree with you. I think it's great to see what's happening. I think for me, when I've used CGMs, stress is stress makes cortisol go up. Cortisol keeps sugar in your bloodstream and not in the cell, because you're getting fueled up so you can run away from your attacker. And so I think a lot of us are like trying to restrict our food and maybe we need to learn how to meditate or say no or set some boundaries. And so it can really be helpful for folks to see kind of what's going on with their energy when we're thinking about fatigue. Are they having huge blood sugar, either spikes or troughs, or dips in their blood sugar? And then what's happening overnight? Is that sleep disruption connected to blood sugar disruption? So it's a great tool.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about some nutrient deficiencies. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more, because I also sort of feel like this is something we're seeing more and more as people experiment with exclusively plant-based diets. And, we're seeing some folks come in with some pretty significant nutrient deficiencies. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes. One I see pretty commonly, I always joke with patients that I should stop being surprised about how many women are iron deficient. I'm not really at this point, but it is shocking, because when you run a complete blood count, you look at hemoglobin and hematocrit, which can show if someone is anemic or not. It's not a marker of iron stores or iron really in the blood. And so running an iron panel and something called a ferritin can be really helpful. A lot of women in perimenopause are having heavier periods. They're bleeding more, they're bleeding longer, and that depletes iron over time. There's one study that really says that if any ferritin under 50 needs to be addressed if a patient has fatigue that isn't explained by another issue. And I would argue that an ideal ferritin is probably even higher than 50. The reference range is like 15. So
Right.
even if a provider does run an iron, it might be 16 and they say, oh, everything looks normal. But a patient is probably still having fatigue. And, if they're still having a period, they might sort of be going above and below that low number. So that's a big one, I think, that's really important. And it usually is just a number of months of iron supplementation. I would add, please don't supplement with iron without the labs and without being evaluated by a provider. Iron overload is also really problematic.
Right.
And so we don't want you to get in trouble there. But having this evaluated and having it checked, I think, is really important to treat if it's a problem. We're also seeing B12 deficiency, and I would say a plant-based diet can drive some B12 deficiency as well. It could also drive low iron if you're not taking in enough iron through your diet. But, the changes in our microbiome can affect absorption of both of these nutrients, B12 and iron. So that's something to be thinking about. If you're on an acid blocking medication, that can really block the absorption of nutrients, especially things like B12. And then also there's an autoimmune condition called pernicious anemia, which can really block the body's ability to absorb B12. And so certainly if someone has other autoimmune conditions or is really, really low in B12, that's something that we need to consider. If someone can get off acid blocking medications safely, that can help improve the absorption of nutrients like B12 and folate and iron. And then just really working on the microbiome, making sure, plants feed the microbiome. So if you're eating this really awesome protein rich diet and you're eating 120 grams of protein every day, and you're eating, Greek yogurt and chicken and protein bars and a steak at the end of the day, you may be missing out on some beneficial fibers that are really supporting your microbiome. And so we want to make sure that there's good plant diversity, in a diet that is ensuring that the microbiome's healthy, that it's staying in a place where it's really going to absorb nutrients well.
Absolutely. And maybe just to kind of take things home for people. So iron is helping us carry oxygen to our tissues. And so if we can't get oxygen to our tissues, we're going to be really tired. B12 is, again, really important for mitochondrial function, nerve function, all of those things. And so those are kind of two main nutrients really important with energy. So they may be low when we're feeling really tired. And like you're saying, it's just unfortunately I think the other thing that's just crazy making is that so many women come in to their healthcare provider and they're said, oh yeah, well, you're in your 40s, you're just going to be tired, but no one bothered to check. Right. And so we always, really want to check. I think that's a great segue into talking about thyroid and how we check thyroid maybe a little bit differently, maybe a little bit more intensely than some others. So let's just talk about thyroid in terms of fatigue also.
Yes. So TSH is what's commonly checked. And I'm not saying that TSH is a bad thing to look at or to evaluate. That is how we diagnose frank hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. However, TSH really is checking the brain pituitary signal to the thyroid. It's not actually looking at thyroid hormones. It's not looking to see if there's an autoimmune condition that's influencing the thyroid as well. And so really getting a full thyroid panel, including antibodies, that includes TSH, free T3, free T4, something called reverse T3, which is kind of like a storage form of thyroid hormone. It's kind of not, it goes up with stress or with illness or with insulin resistance or things like that. That's important to check. So we're getting a picture of the whole thyroid. If a patient does have problems with their thyroid that is autoimmune, then we want to have a discussion about addressing that autoimmune condition. That autoimmune condition may be part of sort of this systemic, I always tell people it's kind of like having a fire in your fireplace and the fuse is partially closed. So it's not burning down the house. but it might be creating some smoke. It might be creating some irritation. So it may be that the autoimmune condition itself is part of why someone has fatigue. They just kind of feel yucky because they've got this roaring autoimmune condition in the fireplace and the smoke's hanging out all in the living room. We can also, with the progression of autoimmune disease or just functionally, see changes in thyroid numbers. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how numbers change, but just knowing that free T3 is really the most active thyroid hormone. It's the one doing the activity. And so paying attention to what levels look like, whether or not it's influenced by autoimmune thyroid disease or trouble in the body making enough of that thyroid hormone. So that's the thyroid hormone that's made not actually in our thyroid gland, it's made in our body from something our thyroid produces called T4. Making sure those are right. We can address the things that are interfering with the conversion to that free T3, that active thyroid hormone. Things like stress can impact that. Low calorie diets, which we see a lot of women on, toxins, medications. And so again, this is taking a whole functional medicine approach to say, things are not quite in an optimal state. What might be the driver of these numbers being the way they are? Is this that you're not eating enough? Is it that your nervous system is dysregulated and you're under lots of stress? Is it a nutrient deficiency that's driving this? So doing a little detective work to say, where's the problem? Where have things gone off the rails?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you engage with the functional medicine provider, is because we're not just a hormone clinic saying, okay, well, the hormones are the problem, we're not going to look for anything else. I think the other thing that I think about a lot with fatigue is long COVID. Long
Mm-hmm.
COVID, mold related illness, tick-borne related illness. There's so many things that can come up during this time when, yes, your hormones are crazy and we still have to make sure your nutrients are right. We have to make sure
Mm-hmm.
your blood sugar is right, all of those things. And so I just really appreciate this because I feel like, one, there's so many women out there that are just going to say, oh, it's normal to be tired because
Mm-hmm.
you're in your 40s. And then we want to make sure that people can advocate for themselves so that they can really push and keep asking questions. Well, how about we check my thyroid? Can we check a free T3, free T4 ratio? All of those other things.
Yes. I think that initial conversation with a patient and the labs that we're getting to really sort of, I always say it's like throwing the net. We're not doing things that are necessarily, obscure or crazy, but we're thinking what based on this patient's history might be a reasonable thing to check, to evaluate and say, hey, is it your hormones? Is it your thyroid? Is it your iron? Is there something that we can identify that might be the driver of fatigue? I think that's, again, listening to the patient and really drawing labs and making decisions, doing testing based off what things might be pointing to. If someone's had COVID in the last 2 months and they've had new onset fatigue since COVID, maybe that's the place where we start to look. I'd also add that this is a really busy season of life for people. And I say that hopefully to encourage women. We're often at the peak of our careers, often have a lot going on in our families. If we have a family, we might be dealing with aging parents. We might be dealing with changes in our own bodies and appearance and things like that. So this is a really stressful season of life for a lot of people. And that in and of itself might be part of it. And that doesn't mean that it's in your head or that you just need to, get over it. I think that's something to consider is that nervous system, psychosocial, there are a lot of pieces to this, and we may not identify a nutrient deficiency or a thyroid disorder, but we might in conversation strike on, hey, you're taking care of your aging parents and you're having big deadlines at work that feel really stressful. And, is there a way to relieve some of this pressure, or how can we support you in the middle of that?
I love that you brought that up, and we can link to Kate did an interview with an online program called Primal Trust, which is a limbic system retraining program. And in really basic terms, the base of your brain is, am I safe? And when a lot of us have had any kind of trauma, be it capital T or lowercase t trauma, the base of our brain doesn't feel safe, and that really can have a ripple effect through our physical, emotional, mental health. Primal Trust is a very accessible online program. So I love that yes, we want to check all of the medical things, but also addressing psychosocial health and mental health. And so we'll link to your interview with Primal Trust because that's accessible on our website. And so people can also take advantage of that, because I think that's a great resource, and it's online. It's a very accessible resource.
Yes, agreed. I have one more thing to add. When we feel exhausted or stressed or just, like life is kind of coming at us, alcohol can be a really nice thing to make us feel better in the moment, and sometimes can become a habit. And I would just say it's probably not, in this whole conversation about fatigue, an overall helpful thing if we're dealing with feeling really exhausted. It probably doesn't support sleep. It certainly doesn't support good detoxification of our hormones. It is not really very beneficial for our nervous system beyond maybe that hour or 2 hours after we consume alcohol. So I think just, encouraging you to examine your relationship with alcohol and to see, is that playing a role at all in some of these factors, or is it a net positive in your life, or do you think it might be causing more trouble than it maybe is worth? So
yeah, I love that you mentioned that. We know that alcohol is related to increasing cancer risk for breast cancer, colon cancer, lots of different kinds of cancer. And it continues to amaze me that a lot of women are afraid to take hormone replacement therapy, but they're drinking half a bottle of wine a night. And at 51, a lot of my friends are like, it's just not worth it anymore, right? The sleep disruption, the hot flashes, the brain fog the next day, it's just not worth it anymore. And so I think that's really important, as we're starting to we have this new game board, we have this new body at midlife that we're working on. What we used to be able to tolerate, we may not be able to tolerate anymore. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Thanks, Kate. This was great. So Kate has availability to see new patients and can bring her expertise, but also this casting a really wide net with comprehensive lab work, having the training and the resources to do more in-depth functional testing if you need it, and also a lot of compassion that I'm sure you can hear from her about also making sure your psychosocial emotional health is supported also. So thanks everybody so much for listening. And thanks Kate so much for helping people find ways they can get more energy.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Menopause Rescue. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and it helps you create some time and space to make this the best half of your life. If you've enjoyed this content, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. This helps other listeners find this resource and rescue and restore their health. If you enjoyed this topic and want to learn more, check out our resource guide for this episode. If today's podcast resonated with you and you want to take a deeper dive, check out my educational resources. We offer basic membership, which is an archive of over 100 videos on menopausal topics ranging from bone health to libido. We add to this archive every month, so the resource becomes richer and richer over time. If you're looking for a menopause expert and live in North Carolina, take our free online class and see if we're a match for your needs. It's called Are We a Good Fit? And is a quick and easy way to learn more about our practice and what it has to offer. Hey, this is Dr. Watson. This is just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed, and any information you get from this podcast is considered educational only. You should make medical decisions with your healthcare provider. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition, and they should seek assistance from their healthcare professionals.